Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. First, we just want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today for another installment of the research webinar series hosted by our team here at the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute, or MVLRI. The goal of MVLRI is to expand Michigan's capacity to support new learning models, engage in active research to inform new policies in online and blended learning, and strengthen the state's infrastructures for sharing best practices. MVLRI is a division of MVU, or the Michigan Virtual University, a nonprofit organization whose mission is advancing K-12 education through digital learning, research, innovation, policy, and partnerships. MVU's efforts include providing online courses to K-12 students across Michigan and the United States, as well as providing a variety of professional learning opportunities for educators focused on innovative educational practices such as blended learning, providing resources, products, and services to personalize learning options for their students and improve student achievement. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started that this webinar will be recorded and shared publicly. Consequently, anything shared during this webinar, including chat comments, could be shared publicly. This webinar may represent a presenter's or an attendee's personal views, opinions, conclusions, and other information which do not necessarily reflect those of MVU and/or the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute and are not given nor endorsed by MVU/MVLRI unless otherwise specified. Today, we are happy to host Dr. Susan Lowe's, the Director of Research and Evaluation for the Institute for Learning Technologies at Teachers College, Columbia University, and Pei Lin, Research Associate, also at Teachers College, Columbia University. With that, I will hand it over to our presenters to get us started.
Okay, Justin, thank you very much. Pei Lin is also Dr. Lin, so I want to make sure that's clear. So for the last couple of years, we've been working with Michigan Virtual MVLRI and using the school's data to look at their self-paced courses, particularly the algebra course. I'm particularly interested in both synchronous and asynchronous, self-paced and cohort-paced courses, and I'm interested in what happens, trying to figure out what's happening inside the courses. So we're going to zip through a presentation here that looks at some of the ways in which we tried to figure this out, how we tried to look at the data, and some of our findings and some of our implications. So just in background, we're looking at LMS output data, so login, session duration, cumulative grades from this particular Algebra I course. We started with data from 2013, and then the results here come from 2014 and 2015, so several years worth of data. The course itself is 18 weeks with a bit of a window before the final exam. It's self-paced. It has multiple assessments throughout. It has a midterm and a final exam. It has a course pacing guides to keep the students what they should be doing each week and which assessments. And you can only move forward if you receive at least 60% on each assessment. So there is an attempt to make it a paced course. We have time-stamped weblog data for fall 2014 and fall 2015. 46 students for one and 52 students for another. Data was organized by student, week, session, time of access, type of page visited for 73,000 rows of data for 1 year and 69,000 for the next year. So a lot of data, and I think the next slide shows a picture of what the raw data looks like. So this is a screenshot, 2 students, 71862 and 71310. Their LMS visits on 2 separate dates, 1215 and 1216. The first student had 2 sessions. The highlighted cell shows the seconds for the timestamps. So this is what the data looks like when we get it raw. And we'll talk a little bit at the end about some of the issues with using this kind of data. So in our first study with the 2013 data, it was qualitative. We looked at some selected cases, and they suggested that passing students tended to work steadily through the semester while failing students tended to work erratically, sort of jamming up the work. So it seemed to us that passing students had better pacing than less successful students. We also found that it was easier to predict if a student would pass than if a student would fail. And that was frustrating because it is the failing students that you really want to help. And so we did some case studies, and this is just to give you a sense of, this was handwork. For the pacing guide is in the first column, an excellent student, a just failing student, and a failing student, and how they pace themselves compared to the pacing guide. So it was from this work that we got the feeling that pacing was really important and connected to ability to pass. So we wanted to see if this was true for an entire cohort. We had a hypothesis, which was passing students stay closer to the pacing guide while failing students fall behind. So the results show that in both years, failing students were always, they are the gray ones, were always behind the pacing guide. In this case, the vertical is number of weeks behind, so you can see they fell further and further behind. While passing students did seem to stay closer to the schedule, and we found the same picture for 2015. But there was a huge amount of variation, especially for the middle range students. And we mapped this to give a visual of it. This is for 2014. The numbers show whether you're on or behind. It's ranged from the most failing student to the most successful student. The orange vertical line is week 17, which is Christmas week. So in general, you can see that this is generally true. The darker colors are at the top, the lower students. But you can also see there's a lot of variety. There are students who could fall really far behind and just do a catch up and get a really good grade. There were a couple of those. There were students who kept on pace and either dropped away or faded away or didn't get a good grade for some reason or other. And this is the same picture for 2015. Similar, again, there's some variety, particularly among the passing students and particularly among the students on both sides of the pass-fail line. And these are the students that you sort of hope that, why didn't they pass? What was going on here that they didn't pass? So when we revisited our hypothesis, does seem to be true, but again, there's great variation. So we wanted to see if there were other ways to group the students other than just passing, failing, and the pacing guide. So we looked at performance, and I'm going to turn this over to Pei to talk about performance.
Hello everyone, this is Pei. So in addition to the pacing that Susan just discussed, we now look at performance. And in our previous studies that we did for MVU, we had only cumulative points and know that sometimes cumulative points were adjusted a little bit because of the instructor decided to award the students with some points. But for the new data, which is what we show in this presentation, we have points earned for each assessment and the date. In the next slide, our original hypothesis was that we had points earned for each assessment, and this will really provide us with additional information about the student pathway through the course. So let's take a look at what the student as a group look like. So Susan walked through how they look like with pacing, and this is how well they did. You can see in this graph that the passing students as a group was almost always doing better than the failing students. However, know that for the x-axis, you have the assessment items from assessment item 1 to 20. That's checkpoint 1 to the final exam. Note that there were two particular assessment items that for the failing students did actually better, because over time we lost more and more students who did not pass the course. So the picture only shows the entire group. However, at the bottom, we also found that, like the case with pacing, we also found that there's a huge variation. So on the next slide, we are going to show what the variation looks like. So again, we have students sorted from the lower to the top grades. On the right column, on the column to the far left, that's the student's final grade earned. And this is for the 2014. And when you look at this heat map, you are going to pay attention to those that the darkest green are the students with the strongest performance. I think it's above 90 and then to 100 points, though they got all the points. However, the lighter green followed by yellow and then to red, those are the performance that was not so good. As you can see, you would expect that students at the bottom block, especially those from 90 to 99, you probably expect that they would have all the darkest color. However, you can tell right away it's not the case. You have the red and the yellow among the higher grades, even above, even between 80 to 89, even between, especially like in the mid-range. And this is consistent with what Susan showed earlier in terms of pacing. And the next one, on the next slide, we have a similar pattern for 2015. And for 2015, we had more students who did not pass, a larger number of students who did not pass the course. And you can see that for these students, the pattern of their performance in terms of the heat map and the color code, they are really roughly similar to those that were on the brink of passing the course. Okay, and then, so revisiting the hypothesis, we had believed that using the points earned will help us know more about how the students went from the beginning of the course through the end of the course. However, this is only the partial picture because we had this huge variation. Oops.
Whoops.
So now,
Okay.
going
over to me. So we have pacing and we have performance, and there was variation in both. So we wanted to see if somehow combining them would give us a better profiles of the student learners. So we created two new variables, one for pacing over time and one for performance over time. Pacing variable was the percentage of weeks in which a student fell 4 or more weeks behind, based on the pacing guide. And performance was the percentage of assessments completed in which a student earned less than 75%. These are arbitrary, well, not entirely arbitrary, but they were chosen by us. We took the 75% because 60% was passing, and we wanted to capture the lower performers. But it was a decision that we made. So our hypothesis was using variables for pacing and performance over time would better differentiate student learners than either one separately. So here are our results. Let's see if I can do this. Sorry, it's tricky. Okay, so they break into 4 clusters. This is a two-step cluster analysis. It's a discovery approach. It didn't feed in final grades. We have basically 4 non-overlapping clusters. So in cluster 1, they were strong academically and strong pacing. In cluster 2, they are strong academically, but their pacing is poor. In cluster 3, their academic strength is weak, but their pacing is good. And in cluster 4, neither are good. The best students were in cluster 1. The failing students were mostly in 3 and 4. That was for 2014. We did the same thing for 2015, and we again got 4 clusters. Good, 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 not good, not good, good, and not good, not good. So the hypothesis that this would help, and it did. We had the best model fit for both years was 4 groups, but what is sort of interesting about this is the good, poor, and the poor, good groups. The middle groups kind of switched percentages in the 2 years. And this is because these are the 2 groups with the greatest variability among them. Okay, so we have our clusters. We have a feeling that both performance and pacing are important and that they fit together in fairly complicated ways. So then we started to look at pathways through the course, and I'm turning this back over to Pei.
Okay, so at this point, we thought it was possible that the students who had poor pacing did not work through the course material systematically. So the way we look at this is by examining the sequences of the learning management system page clicks by course area visited, especially focusing on lessons and assessments. So in terms of the sequencing, what we did was differential sequential pattern mining, which is sequential pattern mining by 2 different groups. One, actually in this case, we show the results for the 4 clusters, which is what we just saw, the good combination, good poor combinations. And our original hypothesis was that the student pathways would vary between the clusters. And our especially focusing on the poor performance versus poor pacing combination, we hypothesized that they would access the non-lesson related items repeatedly, and the results, which is included in the final full report, which we will show later in a link, that actually tells us that's not entirely the case. So here we are going to look at why. So without telling you first what they mean, by looking at these 2 graphs together, one on top of each other, you may have the ideas that they are really not that different, are they? So here, this is actually what happens for two particular students. The one on top earning a final grade of 84.46 for the entire semester, and the bottom earning 14.75 for the whole semester. So this is the number of sessions. This is how many times they log into the LMS during week 4. As you can see, the student on top access the learning management system with a total of 13 times, the bottom 9 times. But roughly, the number of clicks which you will read horizontally with each row, they don't really vary that much. And then the next emphasis for this with this color coded will be, first, you will read from the top. We have this A0 through A8. Those are the students' different visits inside the LMS into different assessment-related area. So we especially want to focus on the dark red, which is A1. That's where the students went in terms of taking the assessment. And the other one that we like to call your attention to it is the A8, which is the darker brown. And that is students seeking help. And in this case, that's sending message to the instructor for anything. And for the C, the gray cells, that's the course related. So it's not related to assessment. It's more course overview, other areas. And then the L will be the lesson related, especially the darkest green. That would be the lesson, strictly where the lessons are, and with L2 being, let me double check, with the L2 being the e-textbooks, and the L3 being the discussion. So as you can see, the two students one of the top students who passed the course, the bottom student who did not. They actually behave quite similarly, only that the top students access the assessments at the beginning of this particular week. So going back to the hypothesis, when we started, we thought that perhaps we could be among these 4 clusters that the poorest combination may have access the LMS in the more non-related to assessment, non-related to lesson areas. However, it may not be entirely the picture. The analysis actually show that all students access non-lesson related items repeatedly, probably because they had to check their grades, they had to read the course overview. But overall, at the bottom, we found that the poor pacing students are less likely to access assessment-related pages immediately after or before the lessons. And the other one we did not include in this presentation is, it may be a little bit counterintuitive, but it's the students who did very well and passed the course that were more likely to seek help, i.e. to message the instructors. So that's one of the things that we wanted to share. So going to the next slide, handing over. Oops.
Okay, so it was a kind of a rush through, but we're going to talk a little bit about the implications for practice, and then Pei's going to talk about something about the difficulties of using this kind of data. So some of the implications for practice, I think, are likely to apply to more than just this algebra course. Did I skip a page? No, this says 2, but it should be 1. So both pacing and performance are important, but the pacing seems to be a controlling factor, and this came out in the cluster analysis as well. So course facilitators should look out for and intervene with those who exhibit poor pacing very early. Now, of course, you have to figure out a way to see that. But once you've set up alerts or whatever, they need to be got back on track and taught self-regulation. Course facilitators may want to give students who do poorly on the early assessments support with the content, but give students with poor pacing support with self-regulation. And I think this is a general rule, but while most students fall behind at one point or another, if a student falls too far behind, they are very unlikely to be able to catch up, particularly if they have low grades. So there's a point at which those students simply seem to just fade away, drift off, or drop. And then there seem to be assessment points in this course at which struggling students were particularly at risk. And I suspect that this is the case in other courses. You just have to determine where they are. I think in this case it was the Unit 1 test, and they just, if they couldn't get past that, and some of them kept trying and trying and trying, those are the points at which they particularly need to be monitored, those points. As Peggy just mentioned, good students spent much more time than poor students seeking help. And so poor students should be encouraged or led to seek help more frequently rather than struggle on their own. And good students seem to spend more time on all the additional resources that are often provided in these courses. Poor students need to be shown why using these is to their advantage. Okay, so now the challenges with this kind of data. So this goes back to Peggy, who was the one that had to really struggle with it.
Susan. Okay, so our first challenges are really with the small sample size. I see that the participants have done a lot of work in terms of virtual school, so I wonder if you want to share anything about whether or not this type of analysis would most likely have cohort size that's going to be really small. Like in this case, Susan shared earlier, the two cohorts that were presented in this presentation, we have roughly about 50 students each. So in this case, you can see the first bullet point, the huge variation from student to student. That was really a big issue. And especially with this size, you have alumni that skew the data, and then also doing the sequential pattern mining using the big data approaches was not so big data. That was another issue. And yes, with the timestamps, we have huge amount of data. However, they only represent dozens of students. And the next one was the structure. So the other issue that we have from before and from now is also the week the data comes from. Let's say we are looking at week 9. However, this is one particular student's week 9. However, maybe another student's week 2. So in that case, we really lost the comparability between the two students, or especially among the whole cohort. And then more challenges. This is more about the analysis. So in this case, for this report, we did rapid minor, and both cases we had issues with, let's say you have the timestamp data for the entire semester. However, our findings or our analysis had this issue with you are only able to use one time variable. So we weren't not able to break the whole semester by weeks. we ended up doing this week after week, which is going to take even more time. And then the last point is really by doing it this way, by doing it in this particular program, you need to restructure the data in such and such way. So that was also one of our challenges in terms of the analysis. I think that's pretty much it. So, Susan, are we going to open?
Yeah, we'll open
to questions.
For questions. Any questions?
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, if the participants have time, please read our report. That's going to show most of the detailed findings that we have for these two cohorts.
If you're interested in the nitty-gritties of the data analysis, read the report. Diane, you have a question. You have a mic, I think.
Can you hear me?
Just.
Okay, let me see if I can turn it up a little bit.
Yeah, that's better.
Is that better?
Yep, much.
Yes.
Okay. I have been working with the Nexus blended high schools, and a couple of years ago, gosh, yeah, ish, something like that. I went to a Pearson conference, and the University of Southern Illinois Carbondale was presenting. And they were talking about trying to find that sweet spot in the semester for their freshman college courses, at which, if they could get students caught up and passing, the students themselves with that kind of success would kind of carry the momentum for the rest of the semester. And so they took their typical freshman college courses, which I think were algebra, biology, English comp, and maybe a speech course. And so, they looked at what were the factors that could support student success, kind of independent student success. And so they looked at measures of sort of formative assessment testing. In other words, how well did kids come into the courses with a solid foundation for that course, the prior material learned. They monitored attendance, how regularly, and this was for courses that had both an online and an on-site component. And then they looked at they looked at performance on the first round of unit tests. And that's where they sort of gathered their information and grouped kids into, they're on track and passing, or they're on track but not passing, or they're not on track but passing, and then not on track, not passing. Anyway, they found that if in all of those groups, if they could get the kids on track and passing by the midpoint in the semester, then the kids could kind of carry the momentum after that. So I took that information and I tried to apply it to our population of kids across our 7 Nexus schools. And what I found is that so many of our kids, because our kids have on-site support at the high school half a day, 4 days a week, but all of their coursework is using online curriculum. What I found is that we had kids running behind almost the whole semester, a majority of kids. And once they got behind, they pretty much stayed behind. And so we tried to look at this idea of an intervention of, trying to get them caught up and passing by mid-semester. But it was just, we couldn't really get there. And then we kind of, our programs are changing educational management companies, so we didn't try to pick it back up. But I was just wondering, did you find anything about kids who were able to pick up and get on pace, having success, ability to kind of carry you through? Or
well, it's interesting. So one of the variables that we did not have was prior learning. So we knew nothing about these students, and that's one of the problems with analyzing this kind of course. You don't have it. Michigan didn't have it, so we couldn't use that as a variable, because I have a feeling it's predictive. The other thing is that we did some other work, and found that the breaks, like the Christmas break, was a really bad time, and we lost students. Students fell behind. They didn't catch up. It was like they just not well regulated students couldn't re-regulate themselves after a long break. But other than that, it's a general conclusion, but there were students in there who would fall behind, and many of them were behind all the time, a week or two. So it's a question of how much behind is too much behind, if you know what I mean, and how much. I think at one point we recommended that these courses build in extra weeks for students to catch up, so that they, if they were just a week or two behind, they could catch up more easily. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
No, I'm glad you said that because actually that's one of the things we're going to try this next year. We're switching curriculum programs, uh, going away from Connections Education's curriculum, and we're picking up Edify. It's a Michigan-based curriculum company, and we're going to start implementing their curriculum because it gives a little bit more teacher control and ability to edit courses and add in some project-based learning, cross-curricular learning opportunities. And that's one of the things we're getting ready to talk about is how to pace the course because our goal is to keep students on pace because again we just feel the same, some of what you found in your study that if they're on track, they're more engaged and you're able to keep them more engaged because once they fall behind, they're just, it's too easy for them to get, to get lost and
Right.
left behind. So yeah, and we're going to build in, every so many weeks, and then there's a week where there won't be lessons, so that all those kids could catch up, and those that are caught up might be able to, do some peer mentoring and some of those kinds of things, just to kind of see what we can do to impact the pacing and see what that gives us in terms of better learning.
Yeah, for the ones who are caught up, give them something to do. Otherwise, you run into the sort of the vacation thing where they just stop and then they forget to come back. Although yours are face to face, so it's a little easier.
Even with the pacing that Susan went over, if you look at the slide now, this is um, at the bottom half almost, that's the stronger students, but you can see that some of them really fell really, really behind. Somewhere at maybe the 10th assessment item or the 11th, but they were able to pick back up. They were able to go back into the course and I think Susan was particularly interested in who they were, so we took a look. I think for 2014, very interestingly, these were the homeschool students in this case. However, I'm pretty sure for this slide that the 2015 it was the opposite.
Right.
So
yeah,
we were not so sure about.
I mean, there was also the issue of students starting the course late, and then having to catch up from the very beginning, and that's really difficult for some students. Again, for Diane, I'm not sure that's an issue because you actually have them in front of you. But
well, we do see that though, because the course themselves are their online curriculums, and they will be next year too. If they enroll with us late and they start behind, we saw that too. And I used to do data for the company, and we used to break out, student success based on those that were enrolled by day one and those that enrolled late, and consistently those that were enrolled by day one, did better. It's just not clear why. Was it as they were more organized and their whole family was organized and they were able to get enrolled on time, or was it a tumultuous situation, or was the student having problems in his regular school and they left and that's why they enrolled late? So, it's
right.
just hard to break out all those mini pieces of the puzzle. I was wondering too, if intentionality of why they're taking the course has an impact. Are they taking it for credit recovery, or is it their first time through the course? And if we see different results based on that. So I'm
Right.
excited to try to dig into some more research too. We didn't really get the opportunity to do action research with connections. So now that we're working with some local Michigan-based folks and have MBU and MVLRI right there with us in Michigan, I'm hoping that we get the opportunity to do more of this because I know our teachers are really interested in seeing what we can learn because the more we understand, the better we can set
Right. Right.
a program for success.
I mean, I think in the Michigan case, there are students who have poor grades and poor pacing, and they basically shouldn't be there. But we're really interested in the ones in the middle. There are students in there that should have passed. They just a little more work and they would have passed. And those are the ones that we would really like to figure out how to intervene. When's the good point to intervene? I think that's a course specific thing. I think in this algebra course there was a certain assessment that was just we suspect that the early assessments were easy and they suddenly got hit with one that was a bit more difficult. So there's this sort of scaffolding, course design issue as well, and that's probably course specific. Any other questions? Yeah, so the type of support, are they going to support the student for self-regulation, or do they need to support the student for content and concept understanding? And can the mentors know which is needed when, or how to do each of them? I was reading that report that you wrote, Catherine, on mentors, and there's good stuff on that. So Diane has a question for Catherine. No, it was the one that you did with, I don't remember now. Maybe.
Becky would actually know that. I believe it's no, that they're not required to have teacher certification. Oftentimes it's one of like a local staff member rather than like another teacher. But I don't know if Becky has her microphone, if she can type in. I can also ping her, but I'm pretty sure that they're not required to have teacher certification. That might be something that we're looking to change policy-wise by submitting key recommendations, because that is something that we are required to do as we're state legislated to do so. So yeah, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, although I think even if they are trained teachers, I'm not they still need to know what to do. Yeah, but maybe what Diane is saying, a mentor training program. You have that, Catherine?
Yeah. So we do have a resource that Jared actually helped us put together. Jared Borup out of George Mason, and it is a module that mentors can take. We also have a lot of mentor guides and mentor reports that help to understand the role of mentors and what mentors typically do, as well as case studies of mentor programs that are, have that 95 percentile success rate for their students or pass rate for their success students. So there are some pretty good models to follow as well as resources to train people, but they are not required at this time. We would love to have something like that required, though, especially considering it is a requirement for all online students to have a mentor assigned to them.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Susan, so there's one thing I like to add. On this slide, this is the 2014 students' performance. And usually, I mean, I had started believing that if a student struggles, that would be from the very beginning. But what really surprised me throughout the analysis was that the struggling students, because we define the struggle by the final grade, right? But when you look at their, especially the checkpoint quizzes, a lot of them actually did pretty well. They did 90%, they did 100%. We don't know the number of the number of attempts they did in terms of trying to get a higher grade, but at least we knew that they were not struggling that much with the easier quizzes. It's the unit tests that were so difficult that were weighted more, that eventually they didn't get enough to pass the course.
Which says something about the course design and watching the course design.
Yeah, so going from 85% earned to 40% within an unit, that's something huge.
Yeah, Diane, were you about to type something or say something? Oh, okay. Okay, so are there any other questions? Otherwise, Catherine, were you going to wrap up?
Yeah, sure. If there are any other questions, please feel free to add them to the chat. Again, we greatly appreciate Susan, you, and Pei for putting together this amazing report and doing this research. Greatly appreciate your help as our fellows program is helping us to keep up with all of the directives that we have to meet for our Michigan legislature. We also have some opportunities for you to publish and to share your expertise. MVLRI podcast, if you have some research to share, you can hook up with Justin Bruno, who is the one who started off the webinar today, as well as the guest blogger program. If you have any research to share there as well, you can write short pieces. We usually give a stipend of $100 for that, so if you have anything to share that way, you can. Our next webinar is Attitudes and Achievement in a Self-Paced Blended Setting by Phoebe Ballantyne out of Northern Illinois University, and that will be on June 28th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And again, here's all of our contact information, our email, mailing sign up. You can actually click right directly on that link if you'd like to. Our Facebook and Twitter, as well as our LinkedIn and YouTube and webinars. And this is being recorded, so the recorded version will be up probably in the next 48 hours or so. So please feel free to check back or share it out if you feel like somebody else would be interested in hearing what Susan and Pei had to share about their research today. Thank you so much again for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.